Welcome back and hello if you are new. So thank you so much for tuning in to what is potentially my penultimate video of 2019. So essentially, any album in this list is an album that I have not stopped listening to. I've bought a record of. I've really kind of struck a chord with, I think, is probably one of the most important ones. And most importantly, albums that will not just be remembered as a footnote in the band's history. Kicking things off, we're going over here to the UK with Venom Prison. Leaders of death metal in 2019, Venom Prison have attained a sizable following. Whereas Animus was quite jittery and very schizophrenic in places, I feel that Samsara is a much more focused and essentially varied attack on the death metal genre. The frenetic nature of their previous LP has been held back, and now there's more of a sense of groove which really gets you into the overall vibe of Venom Prison. And that was one of the things that I couldn't quite gel with on Animus. That being said, Venom Prison are incredibly ferocious, but what's most important, I think, about Samsara is that every single section of their songwriting has been tightened up. However, what probably excites me the most about this album is the end, because you can see where this vision is going. And I think that what their next release is going to be even more interesting and even more engaging, and they're going to build on even more experience that they've had. And I think that it's really great to see a feminist angle in death metal, which is so often kind of quite misogynistic. You know, if you look at the artwork, there's an incredible amount of mutilation of women and things like that. So it's cool to see it kind of being brought back. With Distance Over Time, this is definitely their heaviest album since Train of Thought for me personally. But I think the most important thing is that the band really kind of went back to basics and not only understood each other as a band, but understood each other as this, I say, new incarnation, but they've been together for such a long time now. But really, when you think about it, Mangini, John Myung, Jordan Rudess, John Petrucci, and James LaBrie have really coalesced to create a jam sound, and I think that really comes across on Distance Over Time. And not only are they incredible prog epics, but I think they're also scaled back somewhat. It sounds fresh and modern, which was a real surprise to me, because that was something I was really worried about Dream Theater losing, and essentially, falling into that category of the band that just kind of released the same album each year. But Distance Over Time sees a reinvigorated Dream Theater, and that is what I love. The number 12 Looks Like You finally broke their studio silence with their brand new album Wild Gods this year. And it's the first album in 10 years that the band have put together, and it is unmistakably the number 12 Looks Like You. Combining mathcore, jazz, heavy metal, and pretty much everything in between, number 12 Looks Like You have a really unique sound. But I think maybe what kind of was a little bit of a nostalgia thing for me was that it reminded me of those bands, like Genghis Tron or Alaska era Between the Buried and Me, and it really did kind of have a bit of a throwback nature for me. Every single player on this album is masterful. The drums are fantastic, the guitar work, the range of the vocals is just absolutely insane. But what underpins this genius is the melody, and I think melody is probably the strongest attribute that the number 12 Looks Like You have. It's very much a kind of Carnival of Horrors style to it, and particularly with the really, really striking artwork, I think that it's definitely one that you cannot miss out on. And I do think that maybe some of it did go under people's radars. It certainly went under my radar. It's an absolutely fantastic album, and you really, really shouldn't miss out on it. You are the joyous girl to you. Dreams of powerful force fly. Transcend the world where you are. Now, Car Bomb. Mordial isn't exactly as much about riffs being put together as it is being dissected before your eyes. And I really don't think you're going to find an album that is more experimental in the world of kind of like, djenty metal than this. Carbon are surely one of the most underrated bands in the metal scene today, and Mordial, as did Meta, really kind of changes the idea of what a song could be like, really. There are laser beam style leads, cyclopean riffs that will just literally stomp all over you. And although initially the album might be a bit of a difficult undertaking, if you persevere with it, the rewards are bountiful, honestly. I missed out on reviewing this, and sometimes, albums do slip through the cracks, and this one definitely did, but please don't sleep on this because it's an absolutely fantastic record and a really underrated band. This next selection is definitely an unlikely choice for me, and I'm somewhat confused as to how it ended up here, because previously I haven't really been kind of very well acquainted with Russian circles, but it's been one of those albums where, when you don't know what to listen to, and it's been my go-to album in that kind of category. It recalls that kind of, Pelican-esque sort of taking you away with their sound, and particularly in the world of post-metal, which I am kind of diving further and further into. I think it's a big testament to the band's ability, because they are an instrumental band, so there's no vocal hook, there's nothing that you can kind of attach to, but yet they allow you to kind of follow this narrative and this thread between the album. And if you've not listened to this album yet, I would definitely recommend you just at least give it a go before the year is out, because it was a real surprise for me. Now, without a doubt, Allegion's finest album to date. The band had been experimenting with different areas of, melodic death metal, but I think that Apoptosis really is the culmination of all of this really interesting experimental nature of the band. There are sections of, classical guitar on Colours of the Currents, but then there's a genius use of clean vocals, and it doesn't necessarily sound like they've just been tacked on at the end. I also think it's important to note that they kind of toned down the technicality a little bit. Not much, but enough to have it more catchy and to actually want to revisit the album, whereas some of their earlier material might have been slightly overbearing. Here, I think they found that real sweet spot between technicality and really clever writing. And these are just many of the reasons that make this an album that is light years ahead of their contemporaries. A ghost she left behind. $20 Bin are arguably one of the most important record labels that are keeping new fertile death metal alive, which leads me to a joint entry of Tomb Mold's Planetary Clairvoyance and Vastum's Orificial Purge. Each record is just as brilliant as the other and showcases a different side of death metal. As I'm sure you're very familiar, Tomb Mold have been slowly but surely growing in popularity and have released an album every year, which is a huge feat. And Planetary Clairvoyance is a fantastic example of their evolution. It's more space themed, it's got more kind of darker nooks and crannies, and has a lot more atmosphere. On the flip side, Vastum is more of a hulking, carcass-esque kind of beast. And particularly my good friend Ty Tilley on Instagram, he was the kind of guy who really pointed me into the way of these guys. And the reason I kind of picked these two as neck and neck is that really when I thought about it, I've listened to both records just as much. And I think that it's really important that we shout out to these younger bands because they are smaller and they're starting to get into the scene. And you really need to support the scene, without sounding like a broken record. I know it's kind of bending the rules a little bit, but this joint entry really does deserve your time, both Tomb Mold and Vastum. Give me to the night, give me to the 80s, take me away. Without a doubt, this year's breakout band, Idle Hands, have created an absolute moment of genius on Mana, combining the ideas of Sisters of Mercy, Typo Negative and The Cure, but with a new wave of British heavy metal slant. They have a brilliant sound. Its sense of 80s really courses throughout the album, but it really is that sense of energy for me that always gets me going when I listen to Mana. And it almost sounds like you've got a mini gig going on in your head, but not one of those big gigs, more like a small club intimate show where everyone's really going for it. And that's what I love about Mana. Not to mention, the impeccable songwriting and the fantastic imagery that the band have put together. The branding is so clever that it just works fantastically with the sound, the themes, everything. Mana has not left my speakers all year, and I can assure you that if you give it a listen, it definitely won't with yours. While She Sleeps is latest offering, So What, reflects that sense of discontent that is currently felt throughout the entire country. It also channels the revolutionary ideas of protest in an incredibly slick and energetic fashion that only While She Sleeps would be able to do. Though of course what separates Sleeps and this album from their peers is the absolutely fantastic sense of songwriting, and that is without a doubt the album's biggest selling point. It's a rallying cry to the disenfranchised youth of 2019, and what a soundtrack to do it on. Honestly, some of the tracks on this album have not left my iPod at all.
I took a shot in the dark and wasted.
Apparently, it seems that everyone but me has a problem with the production on this record. I personally absolutely loved the production on Golden Grey. It almost becomes a different person, an extra character to Baroness's seemingly limitless arsenal. And I think that what really makes Golden Grey brilliant is the experimental nature of it. There are so many different elements where the band are, looking at different use of vocals, different use of guitar lines, but most importantly, using this production to really kind of change sections. It allows for the record to have character in an age where there are so many copycat bands, and I think that's really interesting. This is without a doubt, Baroness's most experimental album. For sure, it combines the soothing elements of yellow and green, the more prog elements of red, but then the melody of blue and purple. So that's the first part of my top 20 albums of the year. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know in the comments section below. If you've got any disagreements, I'd love to hear them as well. Let's all have a chat. So next week I will be uploading my final part of my albums of 2019 and what will probably be my final video of 2019. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you next week. Take care, guys.